In this video, I'll talk about measuring ingredients using volume or weight. If you are measuring with measuring cups and teaspoons, you are using volume. And if you're measuring using a scale, you're using weight. And those two are not the same thing. So a scale measures the amount of something you have. So for example, if you weigh out a kilogram of water, that is a certain amount of water molecules, more or less, and it will be the same every single time. But with measuring cups, you're measuring how much space something takes up, and there's more room for error. So if you use volume measures, that is fine. I'm not going to tell you you need to buy a scale, but there are a few things you should watch out for. With liquids, one person might measure out a cup so that the top is brimming over with the liquid, whereas another person who doesn't want to spill might be a little bit below the edge of the cup. So you could see that a cup could be measured differently by two different people. In addition, sometimes people don't place the cup flat on a flat surface and they just try to look at it while they're holding it, and the level of the liquid inside is at an angle. So that's one place where there might be error. Another is salt, which comes in different sizes. So if you buy a salt that has very, very fine crystals, a teaspoon is going to have more salt in it. But if you buy salt that has larger crystal sizes, there are more air spaces between them, and the same teaspoon of salt has less actual salt in it. Another example is sourdough starter, which changes size over time. Basically, when you first mix it, it's really dense, it doesn't have gas in it, and it takes up less space, and then you leave it out and it rises and it becomes bigger. So if a recipe calls for a cup of starter, that can be more or less depending on how much gas is in your starter. But the main place where volume can be off, I think, is in flour, because flour can be sifted or it can be packed, and so the volume can really, really change, but the mass or the weight of it will always be the same. Here I have two glasses, and they're both filled with flour, and you can see they look pretty much the same. And I've got my scale. I'm going to turn it on. So this glass of flour is 430 grams. And this one is 491 grams. So you can see that they're the same volume, but that's a pretty big difference in the amount of flour that is in them. So again, I don't think that you have to have a scale to bake bread, but if you're treating your bread making like a science experiment, having a scale does remove one variable, one potential source of error, because you know that every time you make a recipe, if you weigh out a certain amount of ingredients, you know it's the same as it was last time. So if you do want to buy a scale, there's a few things to watch out for. Most modern scales will have an automatic shutoff to protect the battery, and I personally really like that because I always forget to turn mine off. But you would want one that stays on for a few minutes before it shuts off. I've encountered scales that shut off after about a minute, and that can be really bad because you have your bowl with your flour and you're pouring stuff into it, and then you get distracted by something, or you turn to get more flour and you come back and the scale has gone off and you don't know how much is in there. So look for one that stays on a few minutes. You might want to look for one that uses double or triple A batteries, just because those are super easy to find, versus one that takes some kind of special battery that you'd have to special order. Most scales these days have what's called a tare button. So I turn my scale on and then I put the bowl on it, and then if I hit tare, it goes to 0. So I can start adding my ingredients. You might encounter a scale though that doesn't have this button, and I would not buy that one because it is very, very useful being able to set your bowl to 0, or then add an ingredient and then go to 0 again and add the next ingredient. Finally, a few tips about using scales. Most scales have different units, so this one has grams, it has pounds and ounces, it has a decimal point ounces, and then we're back to grams. Just make sure that when you start weighing things, you are in the units you think you're in. If you're weighing out several different ingredients, you might be tempted to just have one big bowl and keep adding things to it and hitting tare and adding more stuff to it. And that works up to a point, but scales will have some maximum weight that they can't go over. And if you hit that weight, it will suddenly give you an error message and tell you can't go any higher. And you would hate to have that happen in the middle of making your recipe. So if you're weighing out a lot of stuff or you have many, many different ingredients, it's safer to weigh them out one at a time in a bowl and then dump them into the bowl with your big mixture in it. So it also, if you're pouring water into something and you go over a little bit, it's a lot easier to scoop some out if all that's in there is water. But if you're dumping your water right on top of your flour and you go over, then you're gonna have to be scooping it out with a bunch of messy flour mixed in. So that's a good practice to get into.